Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something, well, huge. We're not just looking at a few books. We've pulled together, I guess you could say, an entire library spanning centuries.
Yeah, it's definitely ambitious. We've got ancient philosophy, Roman thinkers like Cicero, Eastern wisdom from the Bhagavad Gita, right up through military strategy, Navy SEALs, Silicon Valley. It's a really eclectic mix.
It really is. And the goal here, the mission, is to sift through all this, disparate material and find those core foundational principles. What actually connects someone like Confucius to, say, Andy Grove at Intel?
It's that search for how to operate effectively, isn't it?
Yeah.
How to have influence, how to build things, how to lead, whether it's yourself or a group, or looking for those timeless shortcuts to effective action.
Exactly. So to make sense of this mountain of insight, we've broken it down into three main parts.
Right. First, we'll dig into the personal foundation. The character, the focus, the self-control you need before you can really influence anything or anyone else.
Then we move outwards into the dynamics of interdependent action. How do groups work? Communication, teamwork, accountability, all that stuff.
And finally, we'll tackle strategy and volatility. Leading when things are chaotic, unpredictable. Which feels pretty relevant today, I think.
Definitely. So let's start where it all begins, with the self, building that personal foundation. And we're kicking off with some pre-contrasting views on virtue.
Yeah, we have to start with Cicero. His work on duties lays out this really structured framework for what he calls the right. It's essentially about moral duty.
Okay, so what are these duties?
He breaks it down into four sources.
Yeah.
First is wisdom or prudence, basically perceiving and dealing with truth correctly.
Got it. Truth first.
Second is justice, maintaining good relationships, giving everyone what they're due, keeping your word, fairness.
Makes sense.
Third is fortitude. That's greatness of mind, strength, being unconquered by adversity, courage, essentially.
Okay.
And the fourth, which he really emphasizes, is temperance or moderation, order, measure, self-control.
And he's pretty hardcore about this temperance thing, right? Especially regarding pleasure.
Oh, absolutely. Cicero's adamant. He argues that indulging in sensual pleasure, like excessive eating or luxury, is kind of beneath human dignity because we have reason.
So eat for fuel, not for fun.
Pretty much. He says food and taking care of your body should be about health and strength, not just chasing pleasure. He thinks luxury makes us weak, unworthy of our, superior endowments. It's a very disciplined, rational approach based on fulfilling external duties.
Okay, so hold that idea, strict duty, rationality, fitting in. Now, let's completely flip the coin with Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Right. Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance, is almost the exact opposite perspective. He looks at Cicero's kind of societal virtues and basically says that's the trap.
A trap? How so?
He argues that what society wants most is conformity. It's a conspiracy, he says, against true individuality, against manhood. Following customs and traditions just makes you lose touch with your own mind, your own truth.
So forget duty, trust yourself.
That's the core message. Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. He insists that nothing, absolutely nothing, is sacred except the integrity of your own mind, your intuition, your inner voice. That's the only guide.
But what if your inner voice tells you to do something, well, bad? Or just weird?
Yeah, he tackles that head on. That's where he delivers that really shocking line. He says, if following your deepest impulse makes you worry you might be aligned with evil, his response is basically,
if I am the devil's child, I will live then from the devil. Wow.
Exactly. It's not saying be evil. It's saying don't let fear of judgment or tradition or what other people think stop you from living according to your own deepest convictions. It's radical self-trust.
So you've got Cicero saying, know the rules, do your duty, and Emerson saying, know yourself, trust your gut. How do you reconcile those? Seems like a leader needs both somehow.
That's the tension, isn't it? You probably do need Cicero's structure to function effectively in the world, but maybe Emerson's internal compass to know why you're acting and what direction to take. It's about balancing that external responsibility with internal authenticity.
Which brings us neatly to the idea of being proactive, taking control. Moving into more modern thought, perhaps.
Yeah. Stephen Covey's work is key here. He talks about being responsible, our ability to choose our response to whatever happens to us. We aren't just programmed machines reacting to stimuli.
There's that space between stimulus and response, right, where our freedom lies.
Exactly. And he uses the story of Joseph in the Bible to illustrate this powerfully. I mean, this guy's life was just one awful thing after another, betrayed, enslaved, jailed unfairly.
He had every reason to be bitter or just give up.
For sure. But Covey points out Joseph focused on his being, not his having. He couldn't control being a slave, but he could control being a good slave, being trustworthy, working hard, having integrity.
And that focus on what he could control himself eventually led to influence, right? Being put in charge of Potiphar's house, then the prison.
Precisely. He operated entirely within his sphere of influence.
Yeah.
That's the stuff you actually can control. Your attitude, your actions, your skills, your choices.
As opposed to the circle of concern, all the stuff we worry about but can't directly change, like the economy, other people's behavior, the weather.
Right, and Covey's point is crucial. Spending energy worrying about the circle of concern actually shrinks your sphere of influence. You become reactive, negative. The only way to expand your real influence is to work on yourself. Be a better listener, develop your character, be more proactive.
Be the change, essentially.
Yeah. And this idea that ultimate freedom is internal, regardless of external circumstances.
Yeah.
Well, it finds its most profound and, frankly, harrowing proof in Viktor Frankl's work.
From his experiences in the Nazi concentration camps, it's hard to imagine a more hopeless situation.
Absolutely. Yet Frankl discovered and taught that even there, individuals could find meaning. If they couldn't change their fate, they could still choose their attitude towards it, find meaning in their suffering, in their sacrifice.
The last of the human freedoms, he called it, to choose one's attitude.
Exactly. And his own life's meaning, after surviving, became helping others find their meaning. It demonstrates that proactive choice, that internal control, isn't just a nice self-help idea. It's fundamental to human dignity, even in the absolute worst conditions.
It sets an incredibly high standard for self-mastery. So, okay, we know we need this internal control, this proactivity, but how do we actually cultivate it day to day? What's the operating system?
For a really practical, almost granular approach, we can look east to the Bhagavad Gita.
The Bhagavad Gita. Okay, how does that approach self-mastery?
Well, it starts with a concept translated as cleanliness, but it's got two aspects. There's external cleanliness, taking a bath, keeping your surroundings tidy, simple enough. But then there's internal cleanliness, and that's about clearing the mind, clearing the accumulated dust, as the text puts it, of past actions and impressions.
Okay, how do you wash your insides, metaphorically speaking?
The primary method prescribed is constantly thinking of the divine, of kana in this context, and specifically chanting the Maha Mantra. It's a continuous practice aimed at purifying the inner self, the consciousness.
So it's a mental and spiritual discipline.
Very much so. And it recognizes that the senses are the gateways to the mind. If you want to control the mind, you have to control the input from the senses. They're described as kind of unruly.
Makes sense. Our eyes want to see things, ears want to hear things.
Exactly. And the Gita singles out one sense as the most challenging, the most difficult to control.
Which one? Not the eyes.
The tongue.
The tongue, really? Why?
Because it does two things. It tastes, influencing what we consume. And it vibrates sound, it speaks, it chants. So it controls both input, food, and output, speech. The idea is if you can regulate the tongue, you establish a foundation for controlling all the other senses.
Huh. So discipline starts small, with what you eat and what you say.
Precisely. The recommendation is to regulate taste by only eating food that's first been offered, mentally or physically, to the divine prasadam. This controls desire and consumption. And regulate sound by chanting the prescribed mantras and speaking truthfully and beneficially.
That's actually quite practical. It suggests if you're struggling with focus or, getting overwhelmed by distractions, maybe the place to start isn't some complex system, but just paying attention to what you're eating and saying.
Exactly. Control the tongue, and you gain leverage over the eyes, what you choose to look at, and the ears, what you choose to listen to. It's about consciously managing the sensory inputs to maintain that internal cleanliness and focus.
So whether it's Roman duty, Emersonian self-reliance, or this kind of Eastern sensory discipline, the message seems clear. Influence starts with mastering yourself.
Absolutely. That internal foundation is non-negotiable.
Okay, so we've built this internal bedrock, the self-mastery. Now, how do we take that and actually work effectively with other people? Because leadership, influence, it doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Oh, it's fundamentally relational. And a great, perhaps surprisingly gentle example comes from ancient Persia via Xenophon's Cyropedia. It's about Cyrus the Great.
Cyrus, right. He grew up in a system that valued equality and law, didn't he? His mother even warned him about becoming tyrannical.
She did. Persia was very structured.
Yeah.
But Cyrus took that idea of adhering to duty and kind of flipped it into a leadership style based on service and, well, charm.
Charm. How did that work in like a military context?
Well, when he took command of his first army, he explicitly rejected the idea that he was leading to get rich, or just because he was the prince. Instead, he said his goal was to outdo these friends of mine in courtesy and kindly dealing.
So he led by trying to be the kindest, most helpful person there.
Essentially, yes. He focused on building affection and trust, not just giving orders. And Xenophon reports it was incredibly effective. He won over his soldiers, their parents. People trusted him completely because they saw his genuine care and effort.
That's quite different from the usual image of a conquering general.
It is.
Okay.
And he managed the team's culture actively, too. There's a story where one grumpy officer criticizes some soldiers for celebrating their wins, calling them imposters for bragging.
How did Cyrus handle that? Shut the officer down.
Not directly. He cleverly redefined the terms. He said, look, an imposter is someone who lies about themselves to get ahead. But someone who just, makes jokes and celebrates with friends without hurting anyone, that's not an imposter. That's a man of taste and breeding, fostering good morale.
So he defended the positive vibe, basically, used his influence to shape the culture.
Exactly. He showed that genuine affection, courtesy, and actively managing the team's emotional climate can be incredibly powerful leadership tools, maybe more so than just rank.
That kind of charm is one way to influence. But in today's world, especially when stakes are high, you need structured communication. What do our modern sources say about making dialogue actually work?
The book Crucial Conversations makes a critical point. The absolute entry condition for any meaningful dialogue, especially a tough one, is mutual purpose.
Mutual purpose.
Yeah, meaning the other person has to believe, truly believe, that you care about their goals, their interests, their values, just as much as you care about your own. And they need to feel you respect them.
So if they think you're just there to win, to push your agenda or make them look bad.
The conversation's basically over before it starts. They'll shut down, get defensive.
Yeah.
There's no safety, no trust, so no real dialogue is possible. It's foundational.
Okay, so establish mutual purpose first.
Yeah.
Then what? How do you move from talking to actually getting things done effectively as a team?
Well, that's where we hit a common roadblock, ambiguity. Patrick Lencioni, in his work on team dysfunctions, identifies the lack of commitment as a major problem. And that often stems from ambiguity. People just aren't clear on what was decided or what's expected.
Right, the wait, what did we agree to? Problem.
Exactly. And the antidote to that ambiguity is clarity. This is where something like Covey's win-win agreements becomes really useful.
These aren't just contracts, are they? It's more of a framework.
Right. It's about explicitly defining 5 things up front. First, desired results. What exactly are we trying to achieve? Second, guidelines. What are the rules, policies, principles we need to follow?
Okay.
Third, resources, what support, tools, budget is available. Fourth, accountability, how and when will progress be measured, who checks what. And fifth, consequences, what happens if we succeed, what happens if we don't, good and bad.
Laying it all out clearly.
Yes. And when you do that, it shifts the dynamic. It's less about a boss breathing down your neck and more about people managing themselves against a clear, agreed-upon standard. The agreement itself becomes the boss, in a way. Covey argues it's much more empowering for people to judge their own performance against clear criteria. It kills ambiguity and fosters real commitment.
That clarity is crucial. But even with the best agreements, things inevitably go wrong. Plans fail, mistakes happen. What then? This is where that military perspective comes in strong, right? Extreme ownership.
Oh, yeah. Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, from their Navy SEAL experience, have this core principle that is, well, extreme. The leader takes ownership, full stop, for everything that happens under their command.
Everything. Even if a subordinate messes up directly.
Everything. There are no bad teams, only bad leaders is the mantra. If your subordinate fails, it's ultimately your fault as the leader. You either didn't train them properly, didn't communicate the plan clearly enough, didn't provide the right resources, or didn't explain the why behind the mission.
That's a lot to take on. I remember the story about the construction supervisor, Gary.
Right. He tries to blame his guy for a mistake, and the response is just blunt. This isn't his fault, it's yours. Ownership of everything. It forces the leader to look inward first. What did I do wrong that allowed this failure to happen?
No excuses.
Zero excuses. And this level of radical external accountability, accepting blame for everything, it demands a serious amount of internal self-control and discipline. You can't practice extreme ownership if you're constantly making excuses for yourself internally.
It connects back to that personal foundation we talked about, that internal mastery.
Absolutely. It brings us back to something like the Bhagavad Gita's perspective on the mind being the chief agent. If your mind is caught up in passion, trying to avoid blame, or in ignorance, not understanding the situation, you can't possibly take true ownership. Your internal state dictates your ability to be externally accountable in this extreme way. You have to govern yourself first.
Okay, so we have clarity, we have radical accountability.
Yeah.
What about the structure of the team itself? How do you build a team that can actually handle complexity and work together effectively?
This is where we need to understand a key difference. The difference between unity and uniformity. Confucius nailed this centuries ago.
What did he say?
His wisdom was, exemplary persons seek harmony, not sameness. Petty persons, then, are the opposite. Harmony, not sameness.
So everyone marching in lockstep isn't the goal.
No. In fact, sameness can be dangerous. It stifles creativity, different perspectives, adaptability. The sources argue that the real strength often comes from having different viewpoints, complementary skills, fitting together like puzzle pieces, not being identical copies.
Unity through diversity, essentially.
Exactly. And we saw a dramatic modern example of this with General McChrystal's task force fighting al-Qaeda in Iraq, described in Team of Teams.
Right, they were up against a very different kind of enemy. Decentralized, networked.
Precisely. AQI was adaptable, fluid. The U.S. task force initially was structured like a traditional hierarchical machine, highly efficient within its specialized units. SEALs did their thing, intel analysts did theirs, but the connections between the units were slow and rigid.
Information had to go up the chain, across, then back down. Too slow for the enemy they faced.
Totally. They realized their individual nodes were strong, but the overall network was weak. So they made a radical shift.
Yeah.
They deliberately sacrificed some of the hyper-efficiency within the individual teams to build much stronger connections between them.
Creating a team of teams.
Yes, they pushed information sharing way down, empowered decision-making at lower levels, fostered trust and shared awareness across different units. They built network strength, achieving a kind of unity based on shared consciousness and complementary capabilities, not just uniform procedures.
And that allowed them to adapt and match the enemy's speed and complexity.
It was critical. It showed that in today's volatile world, that networked adaptability, that unity without uniformity, often beats rigid siloed efficiency.
Which leads us perfectly into our final section, leading when things are volatile, chaotic, unpredictable. Strategy in the storm, basically.
Yeah, and Nassim Taleb gives us a great framework for thinking about this unpredictability. He talks about extremistan.
Extremistan sounds extreme.
It is. It's a domain, like parts of finance or tech, where things aren't governed by nice, predictable bell curves. Instead, you have rare, unpredictable events, black swans, that have massive, game-changing consequences. In extremistan, he argues, traditional planning can be worse than useless because the future is fundamentally unknowable.
So if you can't predict, and planning is flawed, what's the strategy? Just hope for the best.
No, it's about building anti-fragility. Not just being robust or resilient, but actually set up to gain from disorder, to benefit from shocks and volatility. It's about constant adaptation, redundancy, staying fit, playing with the environment, rather than trying to rigidly control it.
Okay, gain from disorder. That sounds counterintuitive. How does that connect to more traditional strategy?
Interestingly, it echoes some ideas from military strategy, specifically Clausewitz on the nature of defense.
Clausewitz, on war. What did he say about defense?
He made a crucial distinction. Strategic defense, defending a whole territory or cause, doesn't mean you have to be tactically defensive everywhere. You don't just sit in a trench waiting.
You can still attack.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's the concept of active defense. Within your overall defensive strategy, you can launch attacks, ambushes, raids, be offensively aggressive in specific places and times. The goal isn't necessarily a quick knockout, but often to exhaust the enemy, make their offensive campaign incredibly costly and difficult, like guerrilla warfare on a strategic scale.
So you're strategically defensive, but tactically offensive and adaptable, leveraging the complexity rather than trying to force a simple solution.
Exactly. It's a pragmatic way to conserve your strength and exploit the unpredictability of the situation, much like Taleb's anti-fragility aims to benefit from disorder.
That idea of massive, unpredictable change really resonates with the corporate world, too. Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, had a term for those moments, didn't he?
He did. Strategic inflection points. These are moments when the fundamental landscape of an industry changes, usually driven by what he called a 10x factor.
A 10x factor, like something becomes 10 times cheaper or faster, or a new competitor emerges that changes the rules completely.
Exactly. Think about the arrival of the internet for newspapers, or maybe sound technology for silent films, or low-cost Japanese manufacturing for certain American industries in the 70s and 80s. It's a force so powerful it demands every company reevaluate its entire existence.
And Grove warned about the biggest danger during these points, right? Getting stuck.
Yeah, the inertia of success. Companies and leaders who've been successful in the past often find it incredibly hard to accept that the rules have changed. They think their past brilliance will save them, or they're just too emotionally attached to the old way of doing things.
He used Intel's own painful experience leaving the memory chip business as an example.
Right, Intel was memory chips. But faced with intense, low-cost Japanese competition, they had to pivot completely to microprocessors. Grove said leaders facing this kind of inflection point need to cultivate an outsider's intellectual objectivity.
Step outside the building metaphorically and ask, if I were a new CEO taking over today, what would I do without the baggage of the past?
Precisely. Shed the emotional attachment. And crucially, understand that this isn't a quick fix. Grove emphasized that an inflection point isn't a single point in time. It's a long, torturous struggle.
Yeah, the Intel memory exit took, what, 3 years to fully play out?
At least. From the initial realization to fully committing to the new direction. And this is where a fascinating idea emerges. Hidden strategy.
Hidden strategy, what's that?
Grove realized that the strategic shift at Intel was actually happening organically at the middle management level before senior leadership made the big formal decision to exit memory, simply through daily operational choices. Middle managers responsible for allocating precious silicon wafer production capacity saw that microprocessors were profitable and growing, while memory was losing money. So naturally, they started allocating more wafers to microprocessors.
Just doing their jobs, making sensible resource decisions.
Exactly. But the cumulative effect of those thousands of decentralized decisions was already shifting the company's strategic posture, paving the way for the eventual top-down decision. It shows strategy isn't always just dictated from the top. It can bubble up from below, especially during chaotic transitions.
So navigating those transitions requires that outsider perspective, but also some kind of internal compass for the organization, right? Guiding principles to keep everyone aligned, especially when things are tough.
Absolutely. And Pixar offers a brilliant example of this after their breakout success with Toy Story. They deliberately established core creative mantras to guide them.
The famous ones. Story is king.
Right. That was number one. It meant the narrative, the characters, the emotional core that comes before everything else. Before the cool technology, before merchandising opportunities, before sequel potential. The story dictates.
In the second one.
Trust the process. This was vital. Making animated films is incredibly complex and often looks like a complete disaster halfway through. This mantra was a commitment to their established creative development process, giving artists and directors the space and confidence to work through problems, knowing the process itself was sound.
Simple but powerful guiding stars.
And they learned what happens when you violate them. Remember the Toy Story 2 situation? Initially, it was planned as a lower-budget, direct-to-video release.
Right, Disney pushed for that.
But trying to aim lower had a terrible effect on morale inside Pixar. It instantly created an A team working on the next big feature and a B team stuck on the less prestigious sequel. They realized they just couldn't do good work by scaling back their ambitions or compromising on story is king. It hurt the culture.
So those principles weren't just slogans. They were essential for maintaining quality and alignment.
Definitely. And speaking of alignment and making good decisions, especially strategic ones, Peter Drucker adds another crucial organizational element: the need for disagreement.
Insisting on disagreement. That sounds uncomfortable. Why is it so important?
Drucker's logic is sharp. He argues that disagreement is the decision-maker's only real protection against becoming a prisoner of the organization.
Prisoner. How so?
Because everyone who brings a proposal or information to a leader is, in Drucker's term, a special pleader. They have their own agenda, their own perspective, their own department's interests at heart. They're naturally going to present the case that favors their position.
So you only hear one side, or a biased side.
Exactly. If the leader doesn't actively demand to hear opposing viewpoints, doesn't force people to articulate the risks or the arguments against a proposal, they simply won't get the full picture. Insisting on structured disagreement isn't about negativity. It's about ensuring a decision is tested, understood, and robust before it's made. It prevents groupthink and strategic blind spots.
Okay, we've covered self-mastery, teamwork, communication, strategy for chaos. But sometimes influence just comes down to raw power, doesn't it? How it's acquired and how it's used.
It often does. And for a brutally pragmatic take, you have to look at Machiavelli. In The Prince, he's crystal clear about the foundation of power.
Which is?
Self-reliance, specifically in terms of force. He says it's essential above all else to have your own army, your own forces. Relying on mercenaries or allies, the arms of others, is fundamentally weak and unreliable.
Yeah.
There can be no more faithful, truer, or better soldiers than your own. Power starts with controlling your own means of enforcement.
Pure pragmatism. Now contrast that stark view with someone like John Locke, writing about the philosophy of government.
A completely different universe. Locke argues that the entire purpose of government isn't the ruler's power, but the preservation of every individual's rights and property. That's its sole legitimate function.
And how should government exercise its power, according to Locke?
Crucially, through declared and received laws known to everyone, not through arbitrary whims or extemporary dictates. If a ruler exercises absolute arbitrary power, Locke says they actually put the people in a worse state than nature, because now one person wields the collective force of everyone against them without any check. Power must be limited by law for the public good.
So Machiavelli focuses on acquiring power through self-reliance. Locke focuses on limiting power through law for the good of the governed. Ideal versus realpolitik, perhaps.
Perhaps. But then you look at how power actually works in practice, often bypassing those ideals entirely. And Robert Caro's work on Robert Moses in New York is just a stunning, sobering case study of this.
Robert Moses, the master builder, he wasn't even an elected official for much of his career, was he?
No. But he controlled vast sums of money and patronage through public authorities, like the Triborough Bridge Authority. And Caro meticulously details how Moses used this financial power to completely undermine the formal checks and balances Locke envisioned.
How did he do it? It was the insurance commissions, right?
Oh, that was a key mechanism. Triborough generated huge amounts of money, including needing massive insurance policies. Moses directed where those lucrative commissions went, and he strategically steered them to the law firms or businesses of powerful political players, the Democratic and Republican county bosses, key state legislators like D. Mallory Stevens.
So he was essentially putting the political machine bosses on his payroll.
Effectively, yes. By controlling the flow of money, he bought their loyalty and support, ensuring they wouldn't interfere with his plans or try to assert the formal authority of, say, the elected Board of Estimate.
Making the official government structure almost irrelevant.
Completely.
Yeah.
A borough president might legally control the streets, but if they needed a park, a highway, or funding that only Moses could deliver, they had no real choice but to go along. Caro shows how the raw power of money and patronage simply bypassed the intended constitutional structure. It's a chilling lesson in how influence can operate, regardless of the rules on paper.
Wow. From high-minded virtue all the way down to the nitty-gritty, sometimes cynical mechanics of power. What a journey. #V. Outro and final thought.
It really covers the spectrum, doesn't it? But what we've seen, I think, is that genuine, sustainable influence, whether it's leading yourself, a team, or navigating a complex world, consistently requires that blend of deep self-awareness, that internal foundation, coupled with smart, strategic, context-aware action in the external world.
Yeah, the principles echo across time, whether it's Cicero on duty, Willington on ownership, or Cyrus on courtesy. There's an underlying demand for integrity, for taking responsibility.
And underpinning all of it is how we perceive things in the first place. Remember that classic perception test Covey uses? The drawing that looks like either an old woman or a young woman.
Oh yeah, people get really stuck on seeing it only one way.
Exactly. People who were preconditioned to see the young woman literally cannot see the old one at first, and vice versa. They argue, they're certain they're right, because their perception is their reality.
Even when you show them both images, they tend to snap back to their original view.
It's a powerful illustration of Covey's point. Where we stand depends on where we sit. Our background, our experiences, our assumptions, our paradigms profoundly shape how we see the world. And we can't really act effectively or with integrity if we're trapped inside a flawed or limited paradigm without realizing it.
Which brings us back to the leaders we talked about. People like Cyrus or Grove or even Emerson in his own way, they seem to recognize they had to challenge their own assumptions, take charge of the narrative, redefine the situation based on a clearer view of reality.
Yes, they manage their own perception first. So that leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. We've seen how conformity, as Emerson warned, is often the path of least resistance, yet maybe not the path to true effectiveness or integrity.
And we live in a world Taleb describes as extremistan, full of unpredictable shocks and changes. So, connecting those ideas, here's the question. What single area in your life, maybe your work, maybe your relationship, maybe just an internal belief, is currently governed by an ingrained assumption, a custom, or name, as Emerson might put it?
An assumption you've just accepted, perhaps without really examining it. Which of those assumptions feels most ripe for a bit of nonconformity? What ingrained idea are you ready to question, just to see if it genuinely serves you, serves the integrity of your own mind, or helps you navigate this unpredictable world more effectively?
Challenging that core assumption, even if it feels uncomfortable, maybe that's where expanding your real influence truly begins. What paradigm are you ready to shift?
Something to think about.
That's the deep dive for this week. We hope weaving together these threads of wisdom gives you some new tools or at least some new questions for your own journey. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.